Let's face it, Russiagate wasn't a noble crusade for the truth. It was political opposition research laundered through the FBI and a secret court, sold to the press, and force-fed to the public. Now James Comey is facing indictment. In this episode of Off Air, I'm going to talk about what that indictment might look like for James Comey, why it happened. We're going to go through Russiagate for those who want to have a thorough understanding of exactly what happened. I'm a federal criminal defense attorney. I spend my day in the courtroom, and I'm going to spend the rest of my day here with you on Off Air. We're putting the dates, names, places together for the indictment of James Comey. Russiagate is the label slapped on a sprawling set of actions that began when the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane on July 31st, 2016. This was supposedly opened up off a tip related to George Papadopoulos and Russian dirt. That's the bureaucratic story. The political story, the one that we all lived while we were seeing it in real time, was the fusion of opposition research with federal power. The Justice Department's Inspector General, in a report released December 9th, 2019, admitted that the Bureau, the FBI, James Comey, blew through basic accuracy standards in the surveillance phase of that operation. 17 significant mistakes and omissions. 17 on a case that touched a presidential campaign and led to the unlawful spying and opposition research against someone who would become an American president. That's not an oops. That's an operation to overthrow the government, to disrupt the election process. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISA, was at issue. James Comey sent 3 separate FISA affidavits forward to try to get wiretaps on Donald Trump's campaign, listen in, and get secret information. The problem with FISA courts, as many of you already know, is that they're not public courts, and they don't allow a hearing, and they don't allow the public to see exactly what's going on, giving James Comey unfettered access into the Trump campaign. Why is that such a problem? Well, we all know, and from my prior episode, James Comey stood in front of the American people and he said, even though I'm investigating Hillary Clinton, even though she erased emails from her server, even though she had classified information located on her server, even though there's evidence of criminal activity related to Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to prosecute her. I'm not going to prosecute her. That speech that was made right before an election, the dropping of the investigation, was the first time in history that anybody could recall an FBI director standing up in front of the American people and telling them that they were going to inform the Department of Justice and Loretta Lynch at the time not to prosecute Hillary Clinton. What we later learned during Crossfire Hurricane is that James Comey, while standing up in front of the American people and making these representations related to Hillary's email server, was simultaneously engaging in wiretapping of an American president's campaign. The wiretaps were based off of an affidavit that was false and provided by the Hillary Clinton campaign, pursuing an underground investigation against a political candidate while overtly disrupting an investigation against another, had a massive impact on the American people. And as it stands right now, James Comey is facing indictment for false statements to Congress related to this investigation. Let's get into the nitty-gritty on all of this so that we can break it down. And by the end of this episode, you're going to have a very, very good working knowledge of FISA courts, of Crossfire Hurricane, of Russiagate, of the affidavit, and exactly why these lies were considered to be so problematic. The Russiagate dossier that many people are calling it these days is really the Steele dossier. And this was something that wasn't intelligence. It was a political operative report that was ultimately treated as intelligence because that's what Hillary Clinton wanted. It was a paid political product. The Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, via their law firm, Peekins Coy, hired Fusion GPS, which hired Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer, to write a stack of memos on Donald Trump. Remember, this flows from Hillary Clinton to the DNC and a law firm connected with it. In March 2022, the Federal Election Commission fined the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign for misreporting spending related to that dossier. Translation: they hid opposition research behind the label legal services. Sound familiar? Yeah, exactly. Donald Trump was convicted in New York for exactly the same thing. On January 6th, 2017, FBI Director James Comey personally briefed President-elect Trump on salacious and unverified allegations from the dossier at Trump Tower. His own words: "This wasn't just a courtesy call to Donald Trump. This put the dossier's toxins directly into the bloodstream of governance and media. And while the tip about Papadopoulos preceded the dossier, the Inspector General confirmed in later reporting that the dossier played a role in the surveillance paperwork that followed, namely those FISA warrants." House Republicans later documented how the dossier's material was used and how the political origins were underdisclosed to the court. Now, we say underdisclosed. What we really mean is concealed. The political origins of the Steele dossier that were later sent by James Comey to the FISA court did not include the details that this was a political report coming from a former MI6 officer, and that it was basically filled with speculation and conjecture, not the types of things we want to base FISA warrants tapping political campaigns on. Here's how FISA is supposed to work under Title I to target a U.S. person. First, you need scrupulously accurate facts backed by a file. A judge approves the tap for up to 90 days, and you can seek renewals with fresh proof. Then you have the ability to tap if a judge approves. It's a secret court right down the hall that James Comey can walk into. But in 2016 and 2017, right when it should have held up, that practice broke down, and it broke down because James Comey made it break down. The Carter Page warrants, the warrants that were for these wiretaps, exposed the rot that was in the system at the time. The 4 authorizations issued, the initial one on October 21st, 2016, signed by James Comey and, I believe, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. They were later renewed on January 12th, 2017, again by Comey and Yates. There was another renewal on April 7th, 2017, signed by Comey and another individual, and a third renewal, June 29th, 2017, signed by Andrew McCabe and Rod Rosenstein. Those initial warrant applications and renewals were based on the Steele dossier. They were based on a political hit piece that was created by the Hillary Clinton campaign. 4 of the renewals bear James Comey's signature. Later, the courts determined that 2 of those renewal applications were actually found by the Department of Justice itself to lack sufficient probable cause. What went wrong? We know this from an IG report that documented 17 major errors and omissions, including the withholding of exculpatory information, that means information tending to show that somebody is not guilty, and overstating damaging claims that were included in the Steele dossier that weren't properly vetted. The most brazen example, FBI attorney Kevin Kleinsmith altered a CIA email, adding "not a source" on a line to make Page look worse. He pled guilty. If a defense lawyer tried that, a judge would nuke the case from orbit, but yet this DOJ case proceeded. Even senior DOJ leadership backed away from this problem. Under oath on June 3rd, 2020, when Rod Rosenstein was questioned, he said that if he'd known the truth about these FISA warrants and the dossier, he would not have signed the renewal. Sally Yates separately said she wouldn't have either. Clear evidence that these people were misled by James Comey in an effort to get them to sign these applications. Was the Trump campaign wiretapped in the end? The answer to that is we may never know, but likely a yes. The IG confirmed the FBI used confidential human sources to record Carter Page and George Papadopoulos in 2016 while the campaign was live. That's a government collection aimed at campaign figures of opposing political operatives. On May 30th, 2017, before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chairman Chuck Grassley asked two clean questions to Comey. Have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump or Clinton investigations? Pretty simple question. Comey said, never. The next question. Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source on those investigations? Comey said, no. A month later, Comey testified he gave his memos of Trump conversations to a friend, Columbia law professor Daniel Rickman, to leak to the press to spur a special counsel investigation, making James Comey's statements to Chuck Grassley bold-faced lies. The DOJ Inspector General later reprimanded Comey for mishandling and disclosing sensitive memos. I don't call that mishandling, I call that leaking. And I call that a violation of the duties that he was to uphold as an FBI director. The DOJ, for some reason, declined prosecution, but policy violation standards were definitely investigated and probably should have been taken care of. James Comey's never leaked posture didn't age very well. Let's fast forward to September 30th, 2020. Dirksen's Senate office building, room G50, Comey told the committee. In the main, it was done by the book. The investigation was done by the book. That line will be measured against the IG's 17 errors and the public smackdown of Comey's handling of this situation. Now, if you thought the evidence pile is already getting substantial, the IG report from December 9th, 2019, the one that cited 17 errors, the FISA court orders in January and June 2020 acknowledging insufficient prediction and invalid renewals and directing sequestration, the Klein-Smith plea for altering a CIA email used on June 29th, 2017, Rosenstein and Yates stating that they would not have signed the warrants had they known the real facts, Carter Page's own testimony describing the fallout from leaks of his identity in the warrant, and the FEC fines against the Clinton campaign and the DNC for misreporting Fusion Steele spending. I'd say when you add all that up, you have a conspiracy. A conspiracy to overthrow the government and disrupt the election, with Comey declining to prosecute Hillary Clinton on his own as an FBI director, not his job, while simultaneously tilting the playing field towards Hillary Clinton in order to muck Donald Trump up with a bunch of lies that he knew were lies that he ultimately leaked to the press. But let's add to that the White House intelligence findings that the dossier material was used and its political origins were not properly disclosed. James Comey's resume matters here because when you have somebody in this kind of position of authority, they can't really claim they didn't know what right looked like. James Comey knows what right looks like. He's been in government service for a long time and was an incredibly talented prosecutor. He's no rookie. He was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the most prestigious position for any prosecutor in the United States. He was Deputy Attorney General under President Bush. He was FBI Director from September 4th, 2013 until May 9th, 2017, with stints as General Counsel at Lockheed Martin, one of the biggest defense contractors, and Bridgewater. He knew exactly how sensitive Title I FISA warrants are. He knew what the truth was. He signed 3 of them in this case. Let's turn to the investigation against James Comey and what he's likely to face in the future. First, he probably got a target letter, and in that target letter, it told him the types of offenses that he's likely to be prosecuted for. That's how these types of cases proceed. That letter would have said, we're investigating you for making a false statement to a congressional committee, and it would have listed a host of offenses, one of them being 18 U.S.C. 1001. What is a target of an investigation? Well, the DOJ's manual, something that James Comey knows quite well, defines a target as somebody that there is substantial evidence to indict. A target letter is the heads up for them to engage counsel, which James Comey already has. And that's common. They normally do that. But likely what also would have happened in this case is they would have come to James Comey and said, give us the information about your collusion with Hillary Clinton, about your efforts to overthrow the campaign, about what happened on the tarmac with Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch. Tell us the real story, or we're going to prosecute you. That happens by the DOJ all the time. They approach defendants to try to get information, and when those people decide to ignore them and withhold the truth, then they can move forward and prosecute them for lying. That's the position James Comey put himself in, and that's exactly what they tried to do with General Flynn, ironic. Now, what is James Comey covering up? That's what we're going to get into on the next episode. But first, let's talk about whether or not these charges will stick. James Comey, as I said, would likely be indicted for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001, which is a false statement, and also 18 U.S.C. 1621, which is perjury under oath, making a knowing false statement. These cases usually turn on materiality. Was the statement important, material? And the exact wording of the question as well as the answer. Where's this case headed? Well, multiple outlets report prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia are moving forward with grand jury presentations over September 30th, 2020 testimony as the 5-year statute of limitations is just about to run on that evidence. A grand jury would likely be convened, and if they issue an indictment, James Comey will be formally charged and he will be arraigned, and it'll be one of the biggest perp walks since Donald Trump had to go through the same thing, not only in Fulton County, Georgia, but also in New York. The procedure of the case would look like this. A grand jury is already convened and is going to hear witnesses and testimony. Those are members of the public who will decide whether or not there should be an indictment. They will either indict him or they won't, but the old phrase is true. You can indict a ham sandwich. James Comey's anything but a ham sandwich. He's a big fat lying sandwich. And you can tell based on the transcript with Chuck Grassley, the IG report, and all of the evidence that we've already found. There's really no way out of this for James Comey. They're going to bring the easiest provable charge, and they're going to make it very clear in the indictment. James Comey can go to a trial and try to say he didn't lie, but even Democrats on the jury are going to have to conclude that, because we already have Democrats concluding it, including high-level Democrats like Sally Yates, Rod Rosenstein. If there was a trial, it would live and die on the transcripts and emails, but the investigation is not just about his false statement. The investigation is about why he made his false statement and who he was colluding with at the time. They will continue to offer him a deal over and over and over again to say, hey, give up the goods on why you engaged in this multi-pronged conspiracy with Hillary Clinton and her campaign. And if you don't do that, then we're going to have to move forward with a charge, and we're going to have to move forward with jail time. The key evidence in this case is really straightforward. On May 3rd, 2017, Chuck Grassley asked a question. There was a June 8th, 2017 admission later that he used Rickman to leak the information to special counsel. You take Chuck Grassley's question, you take his June 8th, 2017 admission, you piece them together and you've got your ham sandwich right there. James Comey also made other material misrepresentations, like his investigation was by the book. It wasn't. There were 17 errors that were documented by the Inspector General at the time. And of course, we had 2 FISA court rulings that the 2 renewals that Comey authorized were not valid and misled the court. He could be prosecuted for perjury in those warrants as well. That's all fine, and he can certainly be convicted on that. But that's not the end of the story. It gets worse. He intruded into a presidential campaign, plain and simple. Confidential sources recorded 2 individuals, Papadopoulos and Page, in 2016. 4 FISA orders were obtained on Page, 3 bearing Comey's signature. The DOJ later conceded 2 renewals lacked probable cause, and the court deemed them not valid and walled off the evidence that was obtained. A senior DOJ official repudiated their own signatures, Yates and Rosenstein, when shown the facts. If that isn't an intrusion, and nothing can be an intrusion. This was spying by lying on affidavits to courts to get information on a presidential campaign. And if it can be proven that that information was leaked back to Hillary Clinton and the DNC, they've got major problems on their hands. This could be one of the biggest takedowns in political history. Clinton funded a dossier that ended up in the hands of James Comey. James Comey lied about the origins of that dossier to a federal court, and he later lied to Congress to cover it up. Those lies prevented the truth from coming out. But now that the truth has come out because of Pam Bondi and the DOJ is looking into it, there will be a prosecution. But with all conspiracies, there not only will be a prosecution, but there'll be a further investigation. So where's this case going to lead? Well, if James Comey gives information about his conversations with the Clinton campaign, with the DNC, about the origins of the dossier, we're going to see a lot of DNC staffers in hot water. We're going to see a lot of indictments. We're going to see a lot of guilty pleas, and we're going to see a lot of evidence given over related to Comey, Clinton, those high up in the DNC. We might even find out that some of the information related to January 6th was cooked up. We might even find out that other allegations during the campaign was cooked up. And of course, they're still investigating whether or not there was collusion between Fani Willis and Jack Smith and all of the other cases. At the end of the day, this could be one of the biggest political takedowns in history. Now, we've got a lot of correspondents and commentators moving forward saying Trump promised to prosecute Comey and it's inappropriate that he would do it. And you might also say, hey, listen, Trump criticized the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, for doing the same thing. But there's a big difference between targeting somebody on the campaign trail and deciding to pursue justice against those people that harmed Donald Trump, the campaign, cooked up evidence against him, cost the American taxpayers millions of dollars in unnecessary investigations, put a whole bunch of people through a whirlwind of pain and agony, and created discord in the United States and fractures between families and good Americans. There's a difference between that and campaigning on a campaign trail with zero evidence against somebody, assuming they're guilty, and making statements that try to sway the public. One is inappropriate as a prosecutor. The other is the administration of justice. And right now, I think that James Comey is not happy with the fact that justice is finally being administered, but I would be reminded of the thousands of people that James Comey decided to go after when he was Attorney General in the Southern District of New York and when he was an FBI director. And I would wonder if his actions were politically motivated here. What else has he done that was politically motivated? And that's why justice is absolutely necessary, whether you are red or blue or somewhere in between. The administration of justice should always be about facts and evidence and the process. As I talk about in my book, Truth and Persuasion, we need to have our systems for how we find the truth, and we need to stick to those systems regardless of the rhetoric and the narrative. We need to seek justice. And so that's why I say, I hope James Comey has a trial. I hope that trial is public. I hope evidence is disclosed to him in a reasonable period of time. I hope nobody went to a court to lie to get a warrant against him. And I hope that the Fifth and Sixth Amendment are rigorously followed, so that when James Comey is carted off in an orange jumpsuit, we can sit back knowing full well that our system did what it was designed to do, and that justice was actually served. That's the difference here. James Comey doesn't want justice. He wants to tilt the political landscape. What Pam Bondi is standing on right now is the business of justice and the administration of justice, which is imperfect, it's messy. And ladies and gentlemen, I see you in the comments section, you want something to happen right now. It's slow, but be patient, because if you were the target, you would want that justice too. If your son or daughter or friend or colleague was the target, you would want that justice too. So let's give it to James Comey. Let's give him all the justice that he deserves. Let's see it play out. And let's make sure that we stay tuned to Off Air while that process happens. I'm Ron Chapman. This is Off Air. Thank you for joining me.